My name's Conor. I head up marketing at Avant-Garde and Enzyme. Avant-Garde is the core developer of the Enzyme protocol. Enzyme is an on-chain asset management solution built on Ethereum and also deployed on Polygon. So if you're attending an ETH event, I'm pretty sure that you're familiar with what a DAO is. But on the off chance that you're not, DAOs differ from sort of centralized entities in that they are obviously decentralized in terms of their organizational structure and governance. There's a shared ownership in terms of decision making, and obviously there's different ways that you can vote to pass kind of changes within the DAO. A number of different systems and mechanisms there. We won't go into that in too much detail. But there's a big problem when it comes to DAO treasury management. If you look at DAO treasuries across the ecosystem, on average, they're down about 90% since their all-time highs. And I think there's several different reasons for this. One of which is there's very little diversification when it comes to DAO treasuries. So oftentimes you'll see that DAO is very overly exposed in their native token. And when the crypto market goes down 90%, you can imagine that that native token will also drop 90%. And as a result, the treasury is now in a pretty precarious situation. The second problem is that governance is incredibly slow and inefficient when it comes to treasury management. So a lot of DAOs will use a multi-sig, and that requires a signature on every single transaction. So if you're looking to execute an on-chain treasury strategy, and you have like 5 different signers across the world in different time zones, and you need to get that transaction signed off for every single transaction that you're doing, that's obviously incredibly slow and inefficient. And the last one is just that tech skills don't equal finance skills. So while you have some incredible founders out there in the DeFi space, just because you're incredibly tech savvy doesn't necessarily qualify you to manage millions of dollars in treasury funds. So let's take a look at a real world example. A few months ago, I think it was back in March, USDC obviously depegged. It went from obviously a one-to-one peg down about 10 cents to 90 cents, 89, depending on the exchange. I don't know how many of you guys are active on crypto Twitter, but at the time it was kind of pandemonium. Everybody was freaking out. We thought this was the end of crypto. There's a few tweets here that you can see people kind of very concerned. Patrick had my favorite tweet though. He says sometimes things have to get worse before they can get even worse. And that kind of sums up the mood of crypto Twitter at the time. Everybody thought, this was the final dagger in the coffin. We'll get back to that in a second, but I think it's important to remember that in the case of potentially a stablecoin depegging, the consequences can be pretty dire. Obviously, because DAOs keep a lot of their treasuries in stablecoins, if you were to have a situation where a stablecoin depegs, aka like USDC, for example, that then puts the DAO at serious risk. But the underlying mechanisms here that make this such a problem is that many DAOs simply can't act quickly enough when there is an emergency situation. So for example, the USDC depeg, a lot of DAOs couldn't have acted quickly enough to get out and swap into a different asset. This obviously poses a significant risk to their treasury holdings and ultimately puts the perpetuity of the DAO in danger. So I wanted to give you guys a real-world example following on from the USDC depeg. This is the ENS DAO forums. So ENS DAO, obviously a very large DAO, Ethereum name service. I believe they have 100 million plus in treasury funds. They were holding about $17 million of USDC when the depeg happened. Now, obviously, that's pretty concerning for the DAO. You can see here that Gary started the conversation in the forums. He said, look, Circle short about $3.3 billion. The USDC peg is off by about 3%. We obviously need to start thinking about what the solution is here and how we can essentially solve this. He's asking all the right questions here. So he says, look, what do we think about this? Who controls the decision making? What decisions would need to go to a DAO vote? And ultimately, like, what options do we have as a DAO? In case the situation gets worse, how can we kind of pivot and get out, essentially? The conversation continued throughout the night because obviously this was sort of happening live right in front of them. So I think during that first post, USDC was down about 3%. Now it's down 7%. You can see the sort of wheels starting to tick in people's minds like, okay, look, we've got $17 million exposure here. We need to find a solution to this. So he's just kind of bringing that back up again. And finally, a few pages down in this thread conversation, we do get an answer from Alicia, and she says, The USDC from the recent swap is sitting in the ENS DAO wallet, which is controlled by the ENS DAO. If there is a plan to do something with that USDC, it will take about 9 days to execute, 7 days for the vote once it's on chain, and 2 days for the time lock. Now, you can imagine that if the USDC depeg situation got progressively worse, having to wait 9 days to swap out is probably not going to be a very optimal solution for you. And then finally, one final post here from Accessor, who's another member of ENS DAO. USDC is going to collapse, period. We must have conversation now or watch it all burn. I thought that was a pretty funny in hindsight, I guess, knowing that USDC didn't depeg. So what are the lessons from this story? Well, obviously they had a $17 million exposure to USDC. The crucial thing here, and I bring this up about ENS DAO not to sort of disparage them, they were asking all of the right questions, but the structure of the DAO itself simply limited what they were able to do. So no amount of desire can make up for kind of, the limitations of the DAO itself. And obviously this would have put a significant risk on their treasury holdings. So this whole story and conversation brings up what we like to call the DAO treasury dilemma. And there's several questions that come up when you are a DAO and you're looking to run an on-chain treasury strategy. The first and most important one is, how do we keep control and custody of our assets at all times? Secondly, how do we ensure a secure delegation? So if we do decide to take those funds and delegate them to a third party, how can we make sure that we're not just blindly giving away the assets and sending them to a wallet address and having to trust that they'll act in good faith? Also, who manages the treasury? So is it going to be an internal treasury officer? Will it be a third-party professional manager? Or will it simply be the DAO via the very slow and inefficient multi-sig process? And lastly, what strategy are we actually going to run? Remember that just because you are smart with tech and have created a DeFi protocol doesn't necessarily mean that you understand the best way to earn yield and kind of grow your treasury in a conservative manner. So this brings up the dilemma itself. Founders often think there's either one of two options. A is that we keep full control and custody of our funds at all times, but we run this via that very slow and tedious multi-sig process. The second option that they think they have is a very quick and efficient delegation process, but you have to sort of outsource direct access to your funds and give that across to a third party. Now, obviously, neither of these solutions are very optimal. And this kind of leads to a dead end. In option A, you simply have approval fatigue. It's just not realistic to get sign-off on every single transaction via a multi-sig. And in option B, for some reason the emoji didn't show up properly, but you compromise security and you're not going to want to hand over full control of the DAO's funds to a third party and have to trust them. So what is the solution? Well, thankfully there is a solution, and it is called Enzyme. So Enzyme, as I mentioned, is a unified solution for the on-chain asset management economy. With Enzyme, there's no more endless debates of control versus efficiency. You can actually get both. So I'll walk you through kind of a visual representation of how this actually works, so you can see from start to finish, and we'll kind of talk through it. So first of all, you have the Treasury multi-sig. Now you can connect that to the Enzyme app. You can create and own your own vault. So a vault is essentially a collection of smart contracts that you can customize. Once you have a vault, you can access all of Enzyme's features, different DeFi integrations, 250 plus digital assets. So the DAO would deposit their funds from the Treasury multi-sig into their vault. The vault then mints ERC20 token shares, which the DAO can then self-custody in their preferred wallet, in this case a multi-sig. But what's really interesting about Enzyme is that you can actually encode within the smart contracts of the vault what a manager can and cannot do. So I could say, for example, I want to run my treasury on Enzyme and I want to delegate it to a third-party manager, but I only want them to interact with these certain protocols and these certain assets. And you can do that for multiple managers as well. So theoretically, you could have a DAO treasury on Enzyme with 3 or 4 different managers, and they all have specific guardrails on what they can and can't do. And again, there's no trust involved here. This is all enforced via Enzyme smart contracts. You could choose to delegate to a professional manager, which is what we do at Avant-Garde, treasury management, asset management. This gives you the speed and efficiency, and also if the DAO isn't necessarily proficient in treasury management, it helps to have that third party to make that more effective. And finally, there's an important piece here as well about like deploying and updating your strategy. So as I mentioned, Enzyme connects at smart contract level with a variety of different DeFi protocols. You'll see here some of the most popular names in the DeFi space. So you can run a very complex strategy, or you could run more of a conservative strategy. It's really up to the DAO, and we work with DAOs to kind of formalize what that actually looks like. And we run 7 subgraphs underneath the Enzyme protocol. So data is pulled through immediately, and it sources everything from 24/7 net asset value reporting, all your financials, the different fees that you've set up in the vault, full transaction log. So from inception of the vault to present day, you'll see every single transaction that has ever taken place. And if you're a DAO and you're outsourcing treasury management, that's quite cool because the entire DAO has one very intuitive dashboard to view performance, not just at the present day, but also over time across multiple protocols. But there's still a few questions remaining. So we've answered how we can solve the custody problem. The DAOs can obviously self-custody their vault shares on Enzyme, which is a non-custodial platform. They can have a secure delegation by delegating that to a third party like Avant-Garde. But who actually should manage their treasury, and what strategies should they run? Well, as I've mentioned, Avant-Garde, we can definitely help. We've been building in the DeFi space since 2016. Our CEO is actually the founder of Enzyme, so we know the protocol intimately. As I've said, we're the core developers, so we're continually updating and adding new integrations to the protocol. We're also very active in governance across the DeFi space. We have a team of asset managers that create tailored strategies depending on the DAO's risk tolerances and what exactly they're looking for. And finally, we continually review and execute on the strategy that we're running to make sure that it's efficient and delivering the best value possible for the DAO. Yeah, bespoke DeFi strategy, many different options here: active, passive, automated strategies, completely up to you. But we have kind of really created a one-stop shop for your DeFi asset management, including obviously treasury management as well. So what is the net result of this? Well, ultimately we end up with no more uncertainties. We've ticked off every single question that we have. In a situation like the USDC DPEG, had that $17 million been in an Enzyme vault, owned by the ENS DAO, but controlled, delegated to a third-party manager like Avant-Garde, we could have swapped out of that position immediately, and it wouldn't have even been an issue for the DAO. So if you work for a DAO, if you are part of a DAO, if you're interested in finding out more about Avant-Garde and Enzyme solution, I'm more than happy to have a chat. Here is a recent report that we've written, How to DeFi Simple Trading Strategies that Generate Alpha. I'm going to step out of the way so you can scan that QR code. We run through 3 different strategies that you can use on Enzyme. The first one is a composable DeFi strategy, so looking at various options there. The second is how you can create a DeFi index on Enzyme. So this is quite interesting because you're not just holding like a passive index in the traditional finance sense where you hold a basket of assets and they essentially sit there and you hope that the price increases. Well, with DeFi, you can run composable strategies. So for an index fund, you have not just price appreciation potential, but also income potential as well. And then finally, we are connected with a few different sort of real-world asset protocols as well, Maple Finance and Goldfinch, among others. So we have a section there on how you can bring real-world assets on-chain. So I think we've got about 5 minutes left. I'm happy to take a few questions. If you guys do want to reach out, feel free to use the contact information on the screen. But otherwise, let's see if anybody has any questions. Thanks.
Thanks. Oh, it's not on. Is it on? So I'm curious of your opinion in terms of DAOs putting their funds into vaults, and then having an additional layer of risk. So if I'm a DAO, I need to trust Enzyme security policies and so forth. Wouldn't it be more beneficial for DAOs to create sub-safes and then having the same mechanisms around there and still integrating with other DeFi protocols? Have you had any responses in terms of having an additional risk?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the main thing that Enzyme offers is that efficient delegation feature. So we thought really hard and deeply about how a potential fund manager could manipulate like the share price of a vault, for example. You know, we've been on mainnet for 4.5 years. We're rigorously audited. We have one of the top bug bounties in the space. So in terms of security, we're, I'd say, one of the top tier protocols. To be honest, it's never really been too much of an issue when we speak to DAOs. Like they look through all of our audit reports, our contracts, and yeah, it's never really been a blocker for us. But thank you.
Hi, and sorry if you maybe answered this already at the beginning of your presentation. I showed up a little bit late, but you talked about how you essentially take the treasury assets and then you tokenize them into like I'm assuming an ERC20 token. How do you deal with the valuation of this like quote unquote mixed bag of assets? Because I would assume that's probably going to be like a big question mark for anybody who's like interacting with this newly minted. Or is the newly minted token only for your purposes, or can it be kind of like widely available in the space as well?
So the how we calculate it would be the share price of the vault is how you determine performance. And like I said, we run 7 subgraphs underneath the protocol. So all of that data is fed through on-chain pipelines. So again, there's 0 trust assumptions. The tokenization method of the actual vault shares. So let's say you deposit $1 million USDC into an Enzyme vault. That money is sitting in an Enzyme vault, but what happens is we're minting token shares, which you can then self-custody. So that's representing your underlying deposit in the vault. And Enzyme obviously is non-custodial, so you have full access to those funds whenever you choose to redeem. The only caveat being that certain vaults have different redemption periods, but typically it's around 24 hours to a week, depending on the vault that you choose.
So would it usually be like a single asset vault, or do you also have like mixed asset vaults?
Yeah, I mean, the vault itself can hold as many assets as you want it to hold. We have a denomination asset in which the share price is calculated, so you would have to set that when you create the vault, but that could be whatever you want. It could be wrapped ETH, it could be USDC, it could be DAI, and then any deposits into that vault need to happen in that token, and redemptions can either happen in that token or in kind, meaning a pro rata share of the vault itself.
How about treasuries, DAO treasuries that deal with, for example, like NFTs or some sort of like DeFi derivatives?
Yeah, good question. So at the moment, we only service ERC20 kind of like Chainlink supported price feeds. We are looking at, in our next version to add NFTs, pre-ICO, several other assets as well, but that's not currently possible. Yeah, good question. Anybody else? Don't be shy.
Hello. So my question would be, you previously mentioned that there is a possibility to set up some kind of preset for the fund manager and actually like say to him what's allowed and what's not. So I'm curious whether there are some additional risk mitigation techniques in terms of what assets could be the manager exposed to, and what could be the ways, say, like in terms of the liquidity, some like diversification of the portfolio, some, just like.
Yeah, good question. So one other feature I think I actually forgot to mention is that there's a slippage tolerance as well. So if you wanted a manager, if you said, for example, like if this manager goes above a 5% slippage, I want their trading permissions automatically revoked. you can set that within the vault. It could be whatever percentage you want. Again, kind of like removing trust assumptions, and that will happen automatically thanks to the smart contracts. So in terms of like specific, you say liquidity percentages on different pools and stuff, that's not possible currently, but the slippage will apply depending on whatever they're essentially trading. Yeah. Cool.
All right.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.